my honor and pleasure to be here with Naftali Moster, who is the founder and executive director of Yafed, an organization doing very important work. And the issue that Yafed is addressing is the lack of and the quality of secular education in yeshivas, particularly the Hasidic yeshivas. So let's start at the beginning. What's the problem we're looking at historically and currently here in America?
So the problem is that in dozens, if not hundreds, of yeshivas, specifically ultra-Orthodox Hasidic yeshivas, and more specifically among the Hasidic boys yeshivas, there are tens of thousands of children that are not receiving a basic secular education. So they attend yeshivas like everyone else, but they spend either almost their entire day or the entire day exclusively on Judaic studies. So on average, Hasidic boys under the age 13 receive only 90 minutes of secular education, and it happens at the end of the day. So from 3:30 p.m. to 5 p.m. approximately. The only subjects they learn tend to be basic English and arithmetic. Mm-hmm. It's taught by, generally speaking, by unqualified teachers, certainly uncertified teachers, and in some cases, incompetent teachers. So, and the attitude towards secular education in general tends to be pretty poor. You know, the kids think it's profane. Teachers and rabbeim give off the message that it's not that important, and some even say that it's a waste of time and so forth. So that's generally the main issue. The consequence of that is that Hasidic men, they come out of that yeshiva system, they're completely unprepared for the workforce or just in general to engage with the world. Most Hasidic men can barely communicate effectively in English. I mean, they could say, I want to go here, but having a conversation, presenting properly at an interview is very difficult. So as a result, the poverty in the Hasidic community is truly skyrocketing. And obviously there's some other consequences as well.
Yeah, wonderful. So where does this come from for you? Is this a personal issue for you? And what motivated you to get involved in this?
Well, it's a very personal issue. I went to a Hasidic yeshiva from when I was 2.5 years old till I was 20. And then when I was 20, I was interested in pursuing a degree in psychology. Even just the idea of me wanting to pursue a degree in psychology was pretty foreign. It doesn't exist so much in the Hasidic world. But then as I attempted to pursue that degree, it became clear that I was very unprepared. I didn't even know, what the word semester meant. Wow. GPA credits, or I had to write an essay to get into college, and I didn't even know what that meant. So, and my entire experience in undergraduate school was basically that throughout the whole process, I felt like there were these tremendous gaps compared with the rest of my class. Mm-hmm. So obviously it's a very personal thing. And then as I looked into it, I discovered, whoa, there are actually laws in place that do require non-public schools to provide a basic education, which includes English, math, science, social studies, even music and art and so forth. We didn't receive any of that, certainly not in high school. I forgot to get to that point. In high school, boys spend their entire day from like 6:30 a.m. to 8 p.m. and get zero secular education. It's exclusively in Jewish studies and in Yiddish. Mm-hmm. So they don't even pick up the English.
Now, presumably the ideology that's pushing back is at least the first two that come to mind. One is Bittul Torah, that essentially engaging in narishkeit, engaging in not secular studies is taking away from Torah study. And presumably the second is that perhaps learning English leads to assimilation, right? That once you have access to the secular world, you may leave this world. Would you say those are the two dominant ideas?
I absolutely agree. The first one I would modify a little bit. It's not necessarily that it's Bittul Torah. It's more sort of like, what is the goal? Every Hasidic yeshiva boys' school sees their mission as preparing every single boy to grow up to be a rabbi.
Yeah.
And ultimately, obviously, only maybe 5% do become rabbis, but that doesn't make a difference. Their goal is to educate every single child to be a rabbi. Therefore, all these other things are kind of like, at least in their view, unnecessary. Okay. I mean, obviously, you're a rabbi, and you find that speaking English and engaging with the world is quite important, but in the Hasidic world, they don't see it that way.
I see. Okay. Okay. So, what is the work that Yafed is doing now to address this?
Great. So we're working, our overall strategy is top-down and bottom-up. So we see the stakeholders, if you will. You have the government all the way at the top, the ones who set the laws and the policies. Then you have the Hasidic leaders in the middle. And then you have the Hasidic constituents all the way at the bottom. Our goal is really to get through to the Hasidic leaders and get them to make the right decision for their people. But it's hard for Hasidic leaders to understand the necessity. They don't feel the poverty as much as regular Hasidic people do. So our strategy is to apply pressure from above through the government to get to basically advocating with the government so that they go and enforce those laws, and from within the community to get them to speak up. So it requires a lot of raising awareness, because the general public doesn't know about the problem. Hasidic community don't know about the laws, and for example, the fact that the yeshivas receive millions of dollars to provide certain services which their children are not receiving. So awareness is a major component of what we're doing. We're doing advocacy and the grassroots organizing, which overlaps with everything, getting people within the community to speak up, providing them different opportunities to do so. So just to give you some examples, we have a truck billboard that drives around Borough Park and Williamsburg and Muncie that just tells them, what yeshivas should be teaching, English, math, science. We have a Yiddish newsletter that we mail to 20,000 Hasidic homes that talks about the importance of secular education. And so forth. So it's just
very nice. Have we seen any successes? And what does success look like? Yeah.
So that's very complicated, because one of the key things we're working on is to change attitudes, and it's very hard to measure the change of attitudes. Right. But being plugged into the Hasidic community the way I am, I do get the feedback, and I see that suddenly the topic of secular education is a major discussion. Some yeshivas have made some improvements. For example, some yeshivas that used to start secular education in 3rd grade now start in 2nd grade. Some yeshivas are beginning to take the 90 minutes that they have much more seriously, and this I hear from people who are involved in these yeshivas, and they're appreciating it because suddenly their own kids are coming home and reading English. So those are some successes. There have been some setbacks too, especially recently when Senator Simcha Felder from New York pushed through a law that would basically weaken the laws pertaining to non-public school education, specifically to yeshivas, to their standards. So he basically weakened them. But for the time being, it does include certain subjects that do need to be taught, and the assumption is that those subjects will now be taught much more rigorously.
Have you experienced any negative responses, backlash, any kind of attacks on you or the organization? And what does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, I in the past I didn't even want to focus on that because it was just like, okay, someone said something. It has become increasingly more ferocious, if you will. A few months ago, a newspaper, an ultra-Orthodox newspaper called Hamodia, I think it's like the most influential one, called me a rodef, which, as you know, Yitzhak Rabin was called a rodef not long before he was actually assassinated. So that was serious. Just today, actually, we got...
Moser? Is Moser a common one? Or?
Moser is very common, but Moser doesn't have the same implication where you must go and kill the person.
Right. So Moser means that you're not...
You're a snitch.
Historically, you don't tell the secular authorities on Jews. And that's like a big diss, a big patch you can give someone. And then a rodef is, that's like has a more violent connotation.
Exactly.
Right?
So,
and you have to pursue and take that person down. Right?
Exactly. So and just today, for example, the organization, we received a voicemail where a guy, in Yiddish or half English maybe, he's like, you should all suffer a misa mashina. Do you know what that is? Wow. That's like a painful death, like that kind of stuff. Oh, so we get that all the time. Recently on Twitter, there's this legislator, a Rockland County legislator from New York, a Hasidic guy, who's been harassing me on Twitter, calling me names, and recently posted pictures of me, my wife, and even retweeted pictures that have my cell phone number and my former home address. So it's getting increasingly ferocious, but it's pretty much to be expected. Right. In fact, I think nowadays the response will be less terrible than it used to be. I know in the past, people would suffer physical consequences. I'm hoping that that's not going to
because you're upping the ante too. I mean, you're saying that there should be consequences for the yeshivas that don't provide their students with the tools to survive and thrive, right? That essentially they should have a loss of funding, essentially. So they feel their funding is being attacked in a sense, right?
Well, I mean, it would be laughable to say, it should be enforced, but there's no mechanism to punish, if you will, those who don't comply. So obviously there has to be that component. Right. There has to be a carrot and stick, I guess. For the past decades, yeshivas have been getting the carrots. They've been getting tons of money, millions of dollars of government funding, for various programs. there's been no stick, no enforcement until recently.
Right.
So that's sort of like what we
Those
need.
of you within the Hasidic and the Haredi world who may be listening, please know this is about Ahavas Yisrael. This is about a love of fellow Jews, to take care of those who are in poverty, to make sure those can thrive and take care of, feed their children. As you know, there's nothing worse than not being able to feed your child, take care of them, not being able to get a job, a basic job. And so this is not some attack on the system, although some people articulated that. This is about basic kavod habrios, a basic human dignity, basic responsibility, arvus, responsibility to fellow Jews, and making sure that the Torah, keep the Torah as it is, but make sure the kids can make it and survive today in America. So my last question for you, unless you want to add anything else, is how can other folks plug in? How can people support your work, and how can they get involved on a potentially even on a grassroots or hands involved kind of way?
Right. So obviously one of the key issues we're facing is funding shortages. That's because Jewish foundations are quite afraid to get involved.
Right.
Non-Jewish foundations are like, well, there's so many Jewish
That's
foundations
right.
that
That's
focus
right.
on
That's
education, on poverty.
Right.
Where are all of them?
Right.
So that's obviously an issue. But there are other ways, including writing op-eds or helping us. We could always use help with editing, video editing and graphic design and so forth. Obviously attending hearings that we attend, speaking at those hearings publicly about why this is important to you, whether you're a taxpayer, an educator, or a Jewish person who is concerned about it. Obviously this applies to those who are in New York, not the ones here in Arizona. So there are all these different ways people can plug in, and of course like us on Facebook, share our stuff, and so forth.
YAFFED, yafed.org, right?
Yeah.
Very good. Well, we should be in Or LaGoyim. We should bring a light into the world, and to do so, we need to be on the front lines of learning and thriving in our careers, to do our best. And this is a hero who's really on the front lines moving this forward. So shkoyach, be matzliach, and
Thank you.
keep up your wonderful work.